Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to part 4, which is going to be taught by the sun. Now, obviously, the sun is our star. It's the center of our solar system. It's our light. It's where all our energy comes from. It's so important. And when people know their zodiac sign, what they really know is their sun sign, what time of the year that they were born. Because the signs of the zodiac are like a calendar of the seasons. And it's very interesting if you think about the difference between people born in the springtime or, say, people born in the autumn time. People say to me, well, how comes they're all so different? So think about a baby that is born in the springtime. And by the time they're a year old, it's spring again, and they're going to be learning to walk during the summer. So they're going to be running around outside. They've got loads of space to explore and run around. A baby that's born in the autumn is going to start learning to walk at the beginning of winter and is likely to be much more constrained, much more indoors. And therefore is going to have a very different experience of the first 6 months of their life compared to a baby that's born in the spring. So we can go through each month like that and work out what it would be like for a 1-year-old at that time of year. So that's just a little exercise that I like to play with sometimes to demonstrate the difference impact that the different zodiac signs have on each of us, depending on what time of the year we were born. It's just a very simple underlying psychological impact. But in essence, the sun is the center of our being, if you like. It is our essence. I like to think of it as our sovereignty. And so that's why I've chosen this headpiece, which to me has a sort of not quite royal, but definitely a celebratory feel to it, and definitely a sense of importance and recognition and fun. Because the sun is very much about fun. When the sun shines, we want to go out and play. So as you probably realize, the sun takes a year to go all the way around the zodiac and very much represents our agricultural calendar. In fact, during the mid-17th century, when the church decided that astrology was actually not a proper science, it was a pseudoscience, that they were willing to hang on to the influence of the sun and the moon because it just couldn't be denied that the sun through the zodiac marked the agricultural calendar, and that the moon obviously had effects on the tides and on women. So they called this natural astrology, and everything else, all the rest of the planets, was pseudoscience. Now, the sun rules the sign of Leo, which is the sign of July and August, when the sun is at its hottest. It's not quite at its highest point, it's gone a bit beyond that, but it's at its hottest. And it's when, people tend to be on holiday, they tend to be out enjoying themselves and out in the sunshine. So the sun is like the essence of who we are. Now, some people's suns are not very dominant. They might actually be quite hidden, and they might not have anything else in that sign of the zodiac. And so the sun might be quite reserved, and other signs might be much more prominent. But when you talk to them and ask them about their nature and what they're interested in and how they tend to operate, the sun sign will always shine through. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we will look at what it is the sun is going to teach us. So if we just have another quick look at the StarWisdom syllabus, and you can see that the sun sits in the center circle, which is all about self-identity. There's 3 planets involved in self-identity. This is about how we learn about ourselves, and they all relate to us very much as an individual, to our personality, if you like. And you can see that it's in the red section, which is the yang energy. It's like it's quite dominant, it's quite forceful. You know, the sun is the most powerful energy that we have in our solar system. So the sun sits in the yang area of the StarWisdom syllabus. So this is a technique that really has to be memorized. Once you see it, you'll realize it's not that difficult to memorize. It's not something that is obvious in the chart, so you do need to memorize it. And as I said, I believe it's to do with our sovereignty. It's to do with our uniqueness, our personal identity. So if we look at my birth chart again, the symbol for the sun is a red circle with a little dot in the middle. And you can see that my sun is in the sign of Pisces. I was born in March. Now, you may have noticed that it's not the only planet that's written in red. We also have the moon over here, and we have Saturn up here, the one that looks like a letter H. And that's because these are the 3 planets that are to do with our self-identity. Now, they represent what we call the ego model, our self-identity, and also the family model. So the sun is very much to do with our mind, our mental level. And in the family model, it tends to correspond to the father figure. It doesn't have to be the actual father, but a father figure. Saturn corresponds to our bodies and represents the maternal figure. Again, it may not be the actual mother, but whoever was the caregiver. Saturn is very much about caring and keeping us safe. And then the moon is about our emotional body, and it represents how we saw ourselves in the family model as a child, what our own experience was as a child. And if you look at the charts of siblings, you'll see that they're all very different. Each child had a very different experience of their place in the family. So the sun rules the sign of Leo. You can see my Leo here over on the right-hand side. It's a fire sign. It's actually a fixed fire sign. So it's exuberant and it wants to be seen, and it will work for that. You know, the sun, because it's up there in the sky and it's just so visible, that's very much what Leo is like. Leos love to be noticed. They might not want to be on stage and have people staring at them because their sun might be quite hidden in the chart, but there will always be something about them that they want to have noticed. For example, I have a sister who is a Leo. Her sun is actually very hidden. She doesn't like to stand out from the crowd particularly, but she does because she always dresses in a very unique and stylish way. So she can't help but stand out from the crowd without even having to say or do anything. And then the Sun and Leo rule the fifth house, which is the house of creativity, romance, children. So it's where we have fun. It's where our joy sits. And the sun, if you think about it, is very much about joy. We always feel better, don't we? When the sun shines, we want to be exuberant. We want to play. We want to have fun. We want to create. We want to go out and socialize and be romantic. It's very much the house of romance as well. And the sun is going to teach us about the hemispheres and the quadrants. So we can split the chart into 4 sections. So the first section is if we draw a horizontal line between what's called the AC, the ascendant, and the DC, the descendant. The ascendant is what was rising on the eastern horizon at the time the chart was constructed. So in the same way that the sun rises on the eastern horizon, we're looking for what sign of the zodiac and any planets that were rising on the eastern horizon at the time the chart was constructed. And the descendant is what was setting on the western horizon. So everything above that line was visible in the sky. It had risen and it was traversing the sky and then going to set. So all the planets that you see above that line in my chart were visible in the sky at the time I was born. And everything below that line was below the horizon of the earth. They were invisible. So you can see that my sun was invisible because I was born at 5 o'clock in the morning. The sun hadn't risen yet. So if you notice, the sun, as the time progressed, the sun would have been rising up towards the ascendant. When it comes over the ascendant, then the sun has risen and we are in daytime. And then we can also split the chart vertically from the MC, what's called the midheaven, and the IC, or the Iman Cooley, something like that. And the midheaven is actually the highest point in the sky at the time the chart was constructed. And the IC was the lowest point below the Earth at the time the chart was constructed. But because of the changes in latitude, sometimes the MC doesn't look like on the chart like it's in the highest position. It can be one side or the other. And equally, the IC is always opposite the MC. So now we have different two halves of the chart. We have a right side and a left side. The left side of the chart, all the planets on the left side learn about themselves by themselves, if you like. So my sun, I need to take space on my own to learn about my sun, to learn what there is on offer. Everything on the right-hand side of the chart, I need other people to bounce off to learn. So if we just block off the lower half of the chart, then we can count how many planets are in the top half. And you can see that I have 5 planets in the top half of my chart, 5 planets above the horizon. So these are in the conscious zone. The top half of the chart represents the conscious, the thinking mind, the objective viewpoint of the earth, of life. The bottom half of the chart, you can see I've got 3, 4, 5, 6 planets. So I'm sort of equal, top and bottom. And the bottom half represents the unconscious half of the chart. This is where we act more instinctively or more intuitively. We're not really, or subjectively. And then if we block off the right-hand side, you can see I have 5 planets on the left. On the I side of the chart, where I learn by myself. And on the right, I have 6 planets where I need to interact with other people. So again, it's a pretty good balance. However, if we then divide the chart into 4, so we look at the 4 quarters, or what we call quadrants, then it's a different picture. So in the first quadrant, I have 4 planets. In the second quadrant, I have 2. And in the third quadrant, I have 4. And in the fourth quadrant, I only have 1. Now, each quadrant has a different focus. So the first quadrant is all about our instinct. It's where we act quite instinctively. So my son is there. So my son acts quite instinctively. It's not really thinking about things. It's quite unconscious and will just react. It will just go for something. Then the second quadrant is the intuitive quadrant. So you can see I have the moon there. So my moon operates quite intuitively, but still subconsciously, still not really thinking about it. But then we go above the horizon, and in the third quadrant, those planets do all think. This is the thinking quadrant. And these planets are looking at the world objectively and are thinking about what they're learning about or thinking about what they're processing. And then the fourth quadrant is called the being quadrant. So it's still conscious, but it's more about awareness, just that settling into that awareness of just being. Now you can see that my dominant quadrants are the first and the third. So my natural way of being is either to work quite instinctively or to think about things. So I can work both ways. It's like part of me will react, will just do, and another part of me will go, oh, hang on a minute, no, I'm going to think about this. I'm going to think about to do this more consciously. So if we think about our sovereignty, it's like the essence of who we are. We may be somebody who works very instinctively. We may be somebody who works largely intuitively. We may be somebody who works more from the thinking level, or we may be somebody who needs to just be, to retire into their own space. There are lots of people who will have everything in one hemisphere. So these are called, the top half is called a hemisphere, the bottom half is a hemisphere, the right-hand side is a hemisphere, and the left-hand side is a hemisphere. And there are people who will have all their planets in the top half, and they tend to struggle with being grounded because there's nothing in the bottom to sort of root them. There are other people who have everything in the bottom half and nothing in the top. And they tend to be very connected to the collective unconscious. They don't see themselves so much as an individual. They see themselves more as part of a team, as part of a group. And then you get other people who have everything on the left-hand side, and they really need their own space. If you ever see a chart for a child and they have a lot of stuff on the left-hand side, it's really important that they have like their own room, or at least, you know, a little cubby hole that they can retreat to and have their own space. And people who have everything on the right-hand side really need company. They have to be with other people. Often they don't even like being on their own. They find it quite discombobulating. So here are the quadrants: instinctive, which we tend to think of as being ruled by the element of fire. And then we have intuitive, which we tend to think of as ruled by the element of earth. And then we have the thinking, which we tend to think of as being ruled by air, mental. And then we have the being quadrant, which we tend to think of as being ruled by the water, by water. But don't worry about those too much. But the instinctive, intuitive, thinking, and being, those are useful concepts to understand. So for homework, what I would like you to do is add up the number of planets in each of your hemisphere. You do your chart and other people's charts, and in each quadrant. Is one hemisphere very dominant? And which quadrants are dominant? Where does your sovereignty lie? In instinctive, intuitive, thinking, or being? And I know someone, a beginning astrologer, who was really taken with this piece of work and was looking at lots and lots of people's charts, just doing this exercise. And people was absolutely confounded by how accurate it was and how much it did actually describe them. So enjoy, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.